My name is Iris Callahan. I am 64 years old, a widow, and once upon a time, I built a company with my husband, Victor. Callahan Interiors started with the two of us sketching designs at our kitchen table, and over the decades, it grew into something people recognized, admired, and envied. Today, it stands as a legacy valued at $60 million, though to me, it is far more than money. It is the echo of Victor's laughter, the late nights with ink stains on his hands, the smell of varnish from the workshop, and the pride we felt when our son Aaron was born. I thought I had raised a man who understood that, but I was wrong. The night it happened, the dining room felt colder than I ever remembered. The chandelier glowed overhead, but it gave no warmth. My son Aaron sat across from me, his jaw tight, his wife Lydia beside him with that sharp gleam in her eyes. On the table between us lay a thick stack of papers, clipped neatly, resting like a trap I was expected to step into. Aaron pushed them closer to me. "It's just a matter of signing, Mom," he said, his voice almost casual, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "You'll still have enough to live comfortably. 40 million transferred into my control, the rest left for you. It's cleaner this way. Lydia and I will manage the estate." I stared at the black letters on the white page. Power of attorney. Transfer of ownership. Words that sliced through me. My own son, my only child, was asking me to surrender the life's work his father and I had built. Lydia leaned forward, her manicured hand tapping the pen she had set on top of the papers. "It's better for everyone, Iris. You don't need the stress. You'll have peace of mind knowing Aaron is taking care of things. Think of it as passing the torch." Her voice was coated in sugar, but the sweetness burned my throat. I felt a memory stirring, a much smaller hand, sticky from jam, tugging at my sleeve. A little boy saying, "Mama, will you come to my game?" I always went. I always believed that love was enough to bind us. And yet here he was, my grown son, asking me to erase myself from the story Victor and I had written together. I touched the pen. My fingers trembled, but not from weakness. For a fleeting second, I thought of how easy it would be to give in, to sign, to keep the peace. But then I looked at Lydia's expectant smile and Aaron's impatient glare. Something inside me hardened. I pushed the papers back across the table. The pen rolled away, clinking against the crystal salt dish. My voice was steady, though my heart thundered. "No." The words seemed to slice the air in two. Lydia's smile faltered. The gleam in her eyes dimmed for the briefest moment. Aaron's face darkened, his nostrils flaring. He leaned closer, his tone shifting from persuasion to threat. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mom. You owe me this." "I owe you nothing," I said, each syllable deliberate. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me with it, and I will not hand it over." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Lydia pulled Aaron's sleeve, whispering something I could not catch. He sat back, his eyes like cold stone. That night, sitting at the very table where we once celebrated birthdays, holidays, and victories, I realized my own son had drawn a line in the sand. He was no longer the boy with jam on his fingers. He was a man consumed by debts, by pride, by a wife who fueled his ambition. He had chosen power over love. And me? I had chosen to stand. If you have ever wondered how far family can go when money casts its shadow, stay with me. This is not just a story about an estate or a fortune. It is about betrayal, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to refuse when the world expects you to surrender. If my words resonate with you, don't forget to join me on this journey by subscribing. Your presence means more than you know. Because that night, after my son married into a wealthy family, he demanded my $40 million estate. I refused. And when he told me I was no longer welcome in his home, I packed my suitcase, picked up the last pieces of Victor I could carry, and drove toward the estate he thought would soon be his. What happened the next day would silence even Lydia's sharp tongue and leave Aaron standing frozen, unable to speak. The morning after that cold dinner table confrontation, I found myself sitting in Harold Green's office. Harold had been Victor's trusted lawyer for nearly 3 decades, a man whose steady presence had guided us through contracts, expansions, and estate planning. The walls were lined with dark oak shelves, holding volumes of law books that smelled faintly of dust and leather. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished conference table where we sat. Aaron and Lydia were already there when I arrived, their expressions tight, impatient. Lydia's nails tapped against her phone screen, and Aaron's leg bounced beneath the table. They didn't greet me. They didn't have to. Their intentions had already been made clear the night before. Harold adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of permanence. This is the last will and testament of Victor Callahan, dated 3 years prior to his passing. It has been properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. It has also been reviewed with accompanying medical records attesting to his full mental capacity at the time of signing. I felt my breath catch. I had read the will once before, in private, but hearing Harold's steady cadence made it real in a way it hadn't been. He read aloud. I, Victor Callahan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, assets, and holdings, including Callahan Interiors, to my wife, Iris Callahan. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. Across the table, I heard a sharp clatter. Lydia had dropped her phone, the glossy screen sliding to the edge before she caught it. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she straightened it quickly, but the damage was done. The mask of control slipped for an instant. Aaron's reaction was less subtle. His face turned red, his jaw clenching so tightly that I thought his teeth might crack. He shot upright in his chair, his fists pressing into the table. This isn't right. There has to be a mistake. Harold looked at him evenly. There is no mistake. Victor's wishes were clear. He left everything to Iris. Aaron's voice rose, raw and edged with panic. Everything? You mean nothing for me? For his only son? Lydia reached for his arm, her voice soft but venomous. Aaron, calm down. We'll contest it. This doesn't stand in court. Harold's eyes sharpened behind his glasses. I would advise against that. Victor anticipated the possibility of disputes. He attached not only his notarized signature, but also certifications from 2 independent physicians confirming his sound mind. Any contest would be dismissed swiftly. The will is airtight. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, though my heart was hammering. The memory of Victor's last weeks washed over me. His quiet insistence that he had arranged everything, his promise that I would not face this storm without shelter. At that moment, I felt the depth of his foresight. Harold closed the folder and then slid an envelope toward me, sealed in thick parchment. Victor also left this letter, addressed to you, Iris. My fingers trembled as I accepted it. I did not open it then, not with Aaron's glare burning into me and Lydia's eyes narrowing as if she could pierce the seal with her stare. I pressed the letter against my chest, as if shielding it from them, from the weight of their disappointment and rage. Aaron slammed his palm on the table. This isn't over, Mom. You can't just lock me out. I deserve my share. Dad would have wanted me to carry on his name, his company. I met his eyes, and for a moment, I saw the boy I once held in my arms, pleading with me for one more story before bed. But that boy was gone, buried beneath debts and ambition. What stood before me now was a man willing to erase me if it meant securing what he thought was his. "No, Aaron," I said quietly, steadying my voice. "Your father knew what he was doing. He trusted me. He trusted that I would carry this forward." Lydia's lips curled into a sharp smile. "Then we'll see if you can handle what's coming." The air was thick with tension as Harold stood, signaling the end of the meeting. My duty was to execute Victor's wishes. That duty is complete. If either of you plan to pursue further action, I suggest you reconsider. You'll only find yourselves deeper in the mire. Aaron stormed past me, his shoulder grazing mine with deliberate force. Lydia followed, heels clicking sharply against the hardwood, her perfume lingering like smoke in the air long after they were gone. I remained seated, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. For the first time since Victor's death, I felt him near, as though his voice whispered through the envelope. "Hold on. I prepared you for this." The weight of their betrayal pressed on me, but the weight of his trust steadied me more. That was the moment I knew the storm had only just begun. By the time evening fell, the sky was already heavy with rain. Clouds pressed low against the city, turning the streetlights into dull yellow halos blurred by the downpour. I drove back to the apartment I had lived in since Victor passed, the place Aaron insisted I move into when the estate felt too big for me to handle alone. It had never felt like home, only a temporary resting place. But it was what I had, and I longed for the familiar scent of chamomile tea and the comfort of Victor's photograph by my bedside. When I stepped out of the cab, the rain hit me hard, soaking through my coat. I clutched my small leather bag against my chest, shielding the wooden box inside. The box held Victor's fountain pen, a handful of his sketches, and now the sealed letter Harold had given me that morning. They were all I had left of him in tangible form. I approached the entrance, water dripping from my hair, and nodded at the security guard behind the glass doors. His name was Robert, a kind man who usually smiled and waved me through. But tonight, his expression was strained. He didn't reach for the door. Instead, he stepped outside beneath the overhang, holding up his hands. "Mrs. Callahan, I'm sorry. I've been instructed not to let you in." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him over the pounding rain. "What do you mean, not let me in? This is my home." He shifted uneasily, his voice dropping lower. "Aaron called earlier. He said your residency here is terminated effective immediately. He sent new documentation. I can't override it." A cold shiver spread through me, sharper than the rain. "He can't do that. My name is on the lease." Robert's eyes flickered with regret. "Your name was taken off months ago, ma'am. I didn't know until I saw the updated file today." My breath caught. I pressed a hand against the glass door as though force alone might grant me entry. Behind the lobby's warm lights stood the life I had pieced together after Victor's death. The quilt draped over the couch, the books lined up neatly on the shelves, the kitchen where I tried to cook for one. All of it suddenly out of reach. The rain beat down harder, plastering my hair to my forehead. I pulled my suitcase closer, the wheels struggling over the slick pavement. It felt as though the world itself had turned me out, stripping me of shelter, dignity, and even belonging. Robert leaned in, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I shouldn't say this, but you should leave quickly. Aaron and Lydia, they're serious about keeping you out. They've sent for locks to be changed tonight." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "Thank you, Robert. I know this isn't your fault." He gave a stiff nod, then retreated inside, shutting the door gently behind him. The click of the lock echoed louder than thunder. For a moment, I simply stood there, drenched, gripping the wooden box in my bag as though it were the only anchor keeping me upright. My son had not only demanded my fortune, but now had stripped me of my home. A taxi rolled past, sending a wave of dirty water splashing over my shoes. I stepped back, shivering, and looked down the street. I had nowhere to go. No warm bed waiting, no lamp glowing in the window for me. All I had was Victor's estate, the sprawling house on the hill where we had once celebrated anniversaries and hosted summer parties. I hadn't slept there since his funeral, but suddenly, it was the only place that made sense. I dragged my suitcase to the curb, rain stinging my cheeks, and waved down the next cab that passed. The driver rolled down his window, glancing at me with a mix of pity and impatience. "Where to, ma'am?" I hesitated, tasting the weight of the decision on my tongue. Then I said, "The Callahan estate. Up on Ridge Hill." He gave a low whistle but said nothing, motioning for me to get in. I slid into the back seat, water pooling on the leather seat beneath me. The wooden box rested on my lap, and I laid a trembling hand over it. The green brooch pinned inside glowed faintly under the passing streetlights, its surface catching what little light the storm allowed. Victor's last gift, his way of saying, "You are stronger than you think." As the taxi climbed the winding road toward the estate, the city lights faded behind me. Trees lined the path, their branches thrashing in the wind, and the storm seemed to chase us higher into the hills. My heart pounded with dread and determination in equal measure. I pressed my forehead to the cool window, watching the raindrops streak downward like tears I could not shed. My life as I had known it was gone. My son had shut me out. But Victor's home, the true Callahan estate, still stood, and I would step inside it, not as a guest, not as a widow adrift, but as its rightful guardian. When the taxi finally stopped at the iron gates, I paid the fare with shaking hands. The driver tipped his hat, muttered, "Good luck," and drove away, his taillights swallowed by the storm. I dragged my suitcase up the gravel path, each step sinking into wet earth. The massive wooden doors of the estate loomed ahead, silent and waiting. For the first time that night, I felt a spark of warmth, faint but steady, rising through the chill. I gripped the brass handle, pushed the door open, and stepped into the darkness of the home Victor had left me. The rain roared outside, but inside, there was only stillness, an invitation, a reminder. I was not finished yet. The estate greeted me with silence. When the heavy wooden door closed behind me, the world outside seemed to vanish. No more rain, no more city noise. Only the faint echo of my own footsteps across marble floors that had once borne the weight of celebrations and laughter. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old books, and I could almost imagine Victor stepping out from the study, glasses perched on his nose, holding a rolled blueprint in his hand. I set my suitcase down in the foyer, drops of rainwater pooling around it. My coat clung to me, chilled from the storm, but the quiet warmth of the estate wrapped around me like a cloak. This was not just a house, it was a chapter of our lives preserved in stone and timber. Every corner spoke of choices Victor and I had made together. What color curtains to hang, which oak tree to plant by the garden. I had avoided this place since his funeral, too afraid of the memories it might stir. But tonight, it felt like the only place left where I belonged. I carried the wooden box into the living room, its familiar weight comforting in my arms. The green brooch gleamed as I opened it, resting against the folded letters and sketches inside. My hand hovered over the sealed envelope Harold had given me that morning. I wasn't ready to open it yet. Not until I had steadied myself. I wandered into Victor's study, the room that had always been his sanctuary. The desk was exactly as he had left it, pens neatly arranged, a leather chair tucked in place, and shelves lined with design books and journals. Dust had gathered in corners, but the heart of the room still felt alive, as though waiting for its master to return. I sank into the chair and finally broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Victor's unmistakable handwriting, firm strokes of blue ink, slightly uneven where his hand had trembled with age. "My dearest Iris," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer beside you. But know this: I trust you completely. The estate, the company, the fortune, they are not just assets. They are the vessel of our life together. I leave them to you, not because of obligation, but because I know you will protect them, not just for yourself, but for the people whose lives depend on the work we built. Do not let anyone make you feel unworthy of this trust. You are the compass. Keep it steady." Tears blurred the words. I pressed the letter to my chest, closing my eyes. For months I had carried the loneliness of his absence, the fear that I could not fill the space he left behind. But in those lines, I felt his hand guiding mine, his presence walking beside me through the storm. I reached into the box and pulled out the brooch. The green stone glowed faintly under the lamplight, its facets catching sparks of gold and emerald. Victor had given it to me on our 20th anniversary, calling it a reminder that strength can be beautiful. He had pinned it to my dress himself, smiling with that boyish grin that never faded, not even when wrinkles deepened across his face. Holding it now, I felt a shift within me. This was not just jewelry. It was a symbol, a promise that I was not powerless. That night at the dinner table, Aaron and Lydia had tried to convince me I was irrelevant, fragile, replaceable. But Victor's words said otherwise. He believed in me even when my own son did not. I fastened the brooch to my blouse, the cold metal settling against my skin like armor. I inhaled deeply, the cedar scent filling my lungs, and let my tears fall freely for a moment before brushing them away. There would be time for grief later. Tonight, there was only resolve. I walked through the halls of the estate, touching the banister Victor had polished with his own hands, pausing at the family photographs still hanging on the walls, Aaron's smiling face at age 12, holding a soccer ball, our family portrait from the company's 10th anniversary, Victor's arm draped proudly around both of us. Each image cut me, yet also reminded me of why I could not surrender. This estate was more than walls and wealth. It was memory, legacy, trust. As I entered the kitchen, I noticed the hum of the old refrigerator still running, the countertops gleaming under low light. A place ready to be lived in again. A place waiting for me. I set a kettle on the stove, the simple ritual grounding me, and listened as water began to simmer. Outside, the storm still raged. But here, I felt a fragile peace. I sat at the oak table, the letter open before me, the brooch pinned close to my heart. My fingers traced Victor's final words again. "You are the compass." For the first time since his passing, I believed him. That night, as the rain hammered the windows, I made a vow to myself. I would not yield. I would not be erased. Whatever Aaron and Lydia planned next, I would be ready. And when the time came, they would understand that the estate was not theirs to claim. It was mine to protect. The next morning, the estate felt less like an echo and more like a living space again. I woke to sunlight spilling through the tall windows, washing over the hardwood floors in long golden stripes. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's story. I felt like I had stepped back into my own. I had asked Harold, Marina, and Tom to come by, and when the heavy brass knocker sounded, it echoed through the halls like a call to arms. I opened the door to Harold first. His gray suit was pressed, His tie neatly knotted, but it was his eyes, steady and calm, that brought me comfort. He carried a leather folder under his arm, thick with documents. Behind him stood Marina Torres, brisk and efficient as always, her dark hair pinned back and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She gave me a small smile, the kind that didn't waste time but offered reassurance all the same. And then came Tom Harris, his work jacket still carrying the faint smell of sawdust and varnish. His hands were rough, his voice warm as he greeted me with a nod that said more than words could. We gathered in the kitchen, where the morning light softened everything it touched. I brewed tea and set it on the table, though it was hardly needed. They hadn't come for tea. They had come to stand beside me. Harold spread the documents across the table. Victor prepared for this. He wanted no loopholes, no gray areas. The estate, the company, the investments, they are all secured in your name. Every piece of paperwork we need to defend that is here. His hand rested on the folder as though it were a shield. Marina opened her laptop, keys clicking quickly. I've been combing through the accounts. Aaron's financial situation isn't good. His startup has burned through capital, and he has personal debts in multiple places. He has already tried, unsuccessfully, to leverage Callahan Interiors as collateral. We have the audit trail. If he makes another attempt, the evidence will expose him. She turned the screen toward me, lines of numbers and transactions flashing by. To anyone else, they might have looked like chaos, but in her hands, they were order, proof, protection. Tom shifted in his chair, pulling a worn leather-bound book from his bag. I wasn't sure if I should bring this, Mrs. Callahan, but I think you ought to see it. He set it gently in front of me. My breath caught when I recognized it. Victor's old workshop journal. Its cover was scratched, the pages yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting inside was unmistakably his. I opened it carefully, tracing the inked lines of his notes. Sketches of furniture, ideas for expansions, margins filled with his thoughts. Halfway through, Tom pointed to a page where Victor had scrawled more personal words. If Aaron ever tries to sell the company, stop him. He does not understand what it means. This is not just business. It is our life's work. Protect it, Iris. The words struck me like a chord reverberating through time. Victor had known. He had seen the risk long before I did. I looked up at Tom, my throat tight. You kept this all these years? He nodded. Victor asked me to. He said one day you might need it. He trusted you to know when the time was right. A hush settled over the table. The weight of Victor's foresight filled the room, but so did his faith in me. For months I had felt abandoned, adrift in grief and betrayal. But here, surrounded by these people, Harold with his steady hands, Marina with her ironclad numbers, Tom with the loyalty of a lifetime, I realized I was not alone. Eleanor arrived last, her entrance quiet yet commanding. Though retired from the bench, Judge Eleanor Price still carried herself with the authority of the courtroom. Her silver hair framed a face lined with wisdom, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and resolute. I reviewed the documents Harold sent. The law is on your side, Iris. If Aaron and Lydia try to force your hand, they will fail. If they attempt to bring this to court, I will make sure they understand the weight of their actions. They will not win. Her words settled over me like a fortress wall, unshakable and strong. For the first time since that dreadful dinner, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. These were not just allies. They were the family I had chosen, the ones Victor had trusted, the ones who believed in the worth of what we had built. I closed the workshop journal, pressing my palm against the cover as though holding Victor's hand through the pages. Then I looked around the table. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. I was afraid I had no one, but seeing you here, I know I can face them. Harold gave a firm nod. You don't just face them, Iris. You stand taller than them. That's what Victor wanted. The brooch at my collar caught the sunlight, throwing a glimmer of green across the table. In that moment, I understood what it meant to carry a legacy, not as a burden, but as a shield, a guide, and a promise. I wasn't just defending an estate. I was defending the life we had built, the people who still depended on it, and the man who had trusted me above all. And I would not falter. That evening, after the allies had left and the estate settled back into silence, I sat in the study with Victor's letter open on the desk beside me. The rain had eased, replaced by a soft wind whispering through the trees outside. I thought I might finally have a quiet night, but quiet, it seemed, was no longer a gift I could expect. My phone buzzed against the wooden desk, its glow cutting through the dim lamplight. I picked it up, half hoping for a kind word from an old friend, perhaps a neighbor checking in. Instead, the screen lit with Aaron's name. My chest tightened as I swiped it open. The message was short, deliberate, each word like a blade. Be at the estate gate at 9 a.m. I'm coming to collect Dad's things. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at the message, the words swimming as if the phone itself had turned to ice in my hand. Dad's things. That was what he called the house, the business, the fortune his father had worked for and entrusted to me. He spoke as if it were already his, as if I were nothing but a squatter standing in the way of his inheritance. I set the phone down and took a long breath, steadying myself against the rush of anger and sorrow. I would not let his threats undo me. Not tonight. A knock at the back door startled me. When I opened it, Marina stood there, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, her coat dusted with the last traces of rain. "I thought you might need these," she said, stepping inside. She placed a thick envelope on the table. Printouts of every financial record, account statement, and transfer attempt Aaron has made. If he tries to claim the estate, we'll show this. It's undeniable. I flipped through the papers, each page stamped with dates and figures, arrows pointing to where money had bled out of Aaron's failed ventures. Proof that he was drowning, and desperate enough to drag me down with him. Before I could thank her, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. Eleanor's voice came through, crisp and steady even over the line. "Iris, I've heard whispers that Aaron may be planning more than just a visit. Do not be alarmed, but I've arranged for security to be present tomorrow. No matter what they say or do, you won't face them alone." Her words wrapped around me like armor. I closed my eyes, holding the phone to my ear. "Thank you, Eleanor. I can't tell you how much this means." "You don't have to," she replied. "Victor prepared you, but he also left you allies. Trust that." After she hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the old house settling around me. The estate no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as though Victor himself lingered in the walls, waiting with me. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, the steam rising in gentle curls, and carried it to the sitting room. The brooch glinted against my blouse as I leaned back, the warmth of the tea grounding me. Tomorrow, I would face Aaron and Lydia again. Tomorrow, they would test my resolve. I thought of the boy Aaron used to be, running through these halls, his laughter echoing against the high ceilings. I thought of how he used to climb onto Victor's shoulders, calling him the tallest man in the world. That boy was gone, replaced by a man whose ambition left no room for tenderness. But even so, my heart ached at the thought of what might come. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the halls. I set my empty cup aside, folded Victor's letter once more, and placed it in the wooden box. Then I turned off the lights and stood by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the gates. Somewhere out there, Aaron was preparing for tomorrow. But so was I. Morning came with a clarity that felt almost cruel. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed in a pale, fragile blue. The gravel driveway leading to the estate gleamed with dew, and the iron gates stood tall, silent sentinels guarding what was mine to protect. I rose before dawn, unable to sleep, and dressed deliberately, fastening the green brooch at my collar as if it were armor. My reflection in the mirror showed a face lined by age, yes, but also by endurance. I whispered softly to Victor, "I'm ready." By 8 o'clock, Harold had arrived, carrying his folder of documents, the corners worn from his constant review. Marina followed soon after, her laptop under her arm, determination in her stride. Tom came last, shoulders broad and steady, carrying Victor's workshop journal like it was sacred, scripture. Eleanor joined us too, her presence quiet but commanding, a figure of law and authority whose very stance could silence a room. We gathered in the grand hall of the estate, the morning light streaming in through tall windows, turning dust motes into flecks of gold. The house felt alive again, not with ghosts, but with strength. For the first time, I wasn't alone in these halls. At precisely 9, the sound of a car engine broke the stillness. Tires crunched against gravel. Through the window, I saw Aaron's black sedan glide up the drive, sleek and polished, as though intimidation could be manufactured in chrome and steel. Lydia stepped out first, her heels striking the stones with sharp precision, her designer coat fluttering behind her like a banner. Aaron emerged next, his expression set in stone, though I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. The front doors opened with a low groan, and I stood at their threshold. My allies flanked me, Harold with his folder, Marina with her papers, Tom with the journal, and Eleanor, a retired judge whose mere presence commanded respect, at my side. Lydia froze mid-step. I saw it in her eyes, the sudden calculation falter, her confidence snag on something unexpected. She had not anticipated Eleanor. She had not anticipated the fortress we had become together. Her grip on Aaron's arm tightened, nails digging into his sleeve. Aaron's voice broke the silence, louder than necessary. "Mom, we're here for Dad's things. Let's not drag this out." I held his gaze, calm and steady. "Your father's things are here, Aaron, with me, where he left them." Lydia recovered quickly, her smile sharp. "We don't want to fight, Iris. We just want what's fair. You can't possibly think you can manage all of this on your own. Hand it over, and we'll take care of it. You can live comfortably, without worry." Before I could respond, Harold stepped forward, his voice measured. "The will is clear. Victor left everything to Iris. There is no contest, no ambiguity. You have no claim." He laid the folder on the table by the door and opened it. Pages fanned out in crisp, undeniable rows. Every signature, every certification, every witness, solid and binding. Aaron's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Lydia's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping for a moment. "Legalities can be challenged," she snapped. That was when Marina set her laptop on the entry table, turning the screen toward them. Numbers and graphs filled the display, a cold, undeniable testament to Aaron's reckless spending. "If you want to talk about challenges, let's talk about this. Records of your debts, failed ventures, attempts to use Callahan Interiors as collateral without authorization. All dated, all documented. If you push this, Aaron, you'll expose yourself to more than embarrassment. You'll expose yourself to ruin." Aaron stepped forward, anger flaring in his eyes. "You had no right." Tom's voice cut through, deep and steady. "No right? Your father trusted me to keep this safe." He opened the workshop journal, his calloused finger pointing to the words Victor had written years ago. "If Aaron ever tries to sell the company, Stop him. He does not understand what it means. This is not just business. It is our life's work. Protect it, Iris." The silence that followed was heavy, unbreakable. Aaron's face drained of color as he read the words written in his father's own hand. Lydia's lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor stepped forward, her presence filling the room. "I am no longer on the bench, but my voice still carries weight. If you attempt to take this to court, you will lose, and not quietly. Your father's will, your financial records, his own written words, they will destroy any claim you think you have. Consider carefully what line you're about to cross." The strength in her voice left no room for argument. Lydia's hand slipped from Aaron's arm, her sharpness dulled, her confidence fractured. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across her perfect face. Aaron looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for a brief second I glimpsed the boy I once knew, lost beneath layers of pride and desperation. But the moment passed. He turned sharply, muttering something I couldn't hear, and stormed toward the door. Lydia followed, her heels striking angrily against the stone floor, her silence louder than any threat she could have uttered. The doors closed behind them, the sound echoing through the hall. I stood still, my chest rising and falling, the brooch at my collar gleaming in the sunlight. My allies gathered around me, and I felt the weight of what had just transpired settle over us. It wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration. This estate, this legacy, was not theirs to take. It was mine to guard, and I had done so, not alone, but with those who believed in me, who stood beside me when my own son would not. I let out a long breath, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, all of you." Harold closed his folder with finality. "This was only the beginning, Iris. But today, you proved something important. You proved you're not standing in anyone's shadow. This is your house, your legacy, and you are more than strong enough to defend it." Outside, the sound of Aaron's car faded into the distance. Inside, the estate stood tall, alive once more with loyalty, resilience, and quiet power. 2 days after Aaron and Lydia stormed away from the estate, I thought perhaps the worst had passed. The house felt calmer, lighter, as if the confrontation had cleared a storm from its very walls. I spent the morning in the study, sorting through Victor's journals, letting his words steady me. But just before noon, the estate gates creaked open, and I heard the unmistakable sound of tires grinding against gravel. When I stepped into the foyer, 3 dark sedans lined the drive. Men and women in official jackets stepped out, clipboards in hand, badges clipped to their belts. They moved with the efficiency of people who had come prepared. My chest tightened as one of them approached the door, knocking firmly. "Mrs. Callahan," he said as I opened it, his tone clipped and professional. "We've received an anonymous report regarding potential violations at Callahan Interiors and irregularities in estate management. We're here to conduct an inspection." Behind him, more inspectors were already moving toward the workshop and offices, their eyes sharp, their pens poised. My pulse quickened. An anonymous report. I didn't need to guess twice who had orchestrated this. Harold and Marina arrived almost at once, summoned by the call I'd placed as soon as the inspectors introduced themselves. Marina was already pulling her laptop out of her bag before she even stepped across the threshold. "Let them look," she whispered to me, her voice calm, unshaken. "We've kept everything transparent. We have nothing to hide." Tom met them at the entrance to the workshop, wiping his hands on his work jacket. His voice carried the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime here. "Follow me. You'll find every safety certificate pinned on the wall, every inspection passed on record. Victor didn't cut corners, and neither do we. I followed as the officials walked through the estate's main office, their eyes scanning paperwork, their pens scratching notes. One woman flipped through the company's records, her brows furrowing as she turned page after page. Marina leaned closer, her fingers dancing across her keyboard. "Every transaction has a paper trail," she said, her tone steady. "I've printed copies if you need them." In the workshop, another inspector checked machinery, tracing his fingers along the edge of a polished frame. Tom produced binders from a steel cabinet, each labeled with dates and certifications. "This is every compliance check for the past 10 years, he said. His voice carried no defensiveness, only pride. Hours passed. They combed through every document, every corner of the estate's records, every tool and safety permit. I stayed near, hands clasped tightly in front of me, watching their pens move, listening to the faint sound of paper shuffling. Each tick of the clock on the wall was a reminder of the weight hanging over us. Finally, in the late afternoon, the lead inspector gathered his colleagues in the foyer. They spoke in low voices, comparing notes. I stood still, the brooch warm against my chest, Victor's words echoing in my memory. "You are the compass. Keep it steady." The inspector cleared his throat. "Mrs. Callahan, our review is complete. All documentation is in order. Callahan Interiors meets and exceeds every regulation. The estate's records are accurate, transparent, and compliant. In fact," he glanced at his notes, "it's exemplary." The word hung in the air, like a bell ringing across the valley. Exemplary. Marina exhaled sharply, closing her laptop with a satisfied snap. Tom folded his arms, his face softening with quiet pride. Harold simply nodded, as though this had been inevitable. I pressed a hand to my chest, relief flooding through me. I had braced for humiliation, for whispers and suspicion to cling to me like shadows. Instead, I was vindicated. The anonymous report meant to tear me down had only strengthened what Victor and I had built. The inspectors packed their files, shook hands stiffly, and left the estate as the sun began to sink. The golden light stretched across the gravel drive, turning it into a path of fire leading away from the gates. I stood there until the last car disappeared, until silence returned to the estate once more. "They tried to destroy you," Marina said softly, standing beside me. "But all they managed was to prove you stronger." I looked down at the brooch gleaming against my blouse. It caught the last of the sunlight, scattering it across the floor in tiny emerald shards. "No," I said, my voice calm. "All they proved is that Victor was right to trust me." That night, as I walked through the quiet halls of the estate, I realized that every attempt to strip me of my place only bound me to it more deeply. This was not just a home or a company. It was proof of integrity, of endurance, of love. And no anonymous accusation could erase that. The house was finally quiet again, but the silence pressed against me like a weight. The inspection had left me drained, and though victory was mine, the cost of this battle echoed louder than any applause could. That night, I sat alone at Victor's desk in the study, the lamp casting a circle of light that left the rest of the room in shadows. The wooden box rested beside me, its lid open, the scent of old paper and cedar rising faintly into the air. I reached for a sheet of stationery, the kind Victor had always favored, creamy and heavy, with a faint watermark. I dipped his fountain pen into ink, the same one I had carried from the apartment through the storm, and began to write. "Dear Aaron," I began. The words felt heavy, dragging against the page. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from the ache that lived in my chest. I don't know if you will ever read this. Perhaps it is better if you do not. But tonight I need to speak to you, even if only through the silence." I paused, listening to the creak of the old house, to the faint sigh of wind through the trees outside. My son's face swam before me, not the man who had stood at my gates demanding my estate, but the boy who once climbed onto Victor's shoulders, who begged me for bedtime stories, who left his muddy sneakers by the back door after soccer practice. "You were my joy," I wrote, "the reason I believed in tomorrow. I thought raising you in this house with love and laughter would be enough, but somewhere along the way, we lost each other. Maybe I lost you, maybe you lost me, or maybe we both let go without knowing." Tears blurred the ink, and I wiped them quickly before they could spread. I forced my hand steady. "I have already lost your father. Losing you feels like a second death. And yet, I cannot give you what you ask. To sign away our life's work would not only betray your father's trust, it would betray you too. You may not see it now, but the man you are becoming is not the man I raised. I can't feed the part of you that hungers for power at the cost of everything else. I can't give that darkness my blessing." I set the pen down, pressing my palms against my eyes. The pain was sharp, but behind it came something gentler, clarity. When I picked up the pen again, I wrote slowly, deliberately. "I lost my son, Aaron, but I will not lose myself, and I will not lose your father's legacy. If one day you find your way back to me, you will find my love unchanged. But until then, know this: I will stand, even if I stand alone." My hand cramped, the words crowding together in my haste to capture the ache, the truth, the love twisted with grief. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and slid it into an envelope. I did not seal it. I knew it was never meant to be sent. Instead, I placed it inside the wooden box, tucking it beside Victor's letter. A letter of hope beside a letter of loss. A man's faith paired with a mother's sorrow. I sat back in the chair, staring at the faint shimmer of the green brooch in the lamplight. It glowed softly, as if reminding me that strength was not the absence of pain, but the choice to keep moving through it. The clock on the mantel struck midnight, the chimes echoing into the empty halls. I laid my hand over the box, whispering words into the silence. "I love you, Aaron, even if I can't reach you." Then I turned off the lamp, leaving the study in darkness, and walked slowly to my room. The letter would remain there, unseen, unheard, carrying the truth of a mother's heart. And I carried with me the knowledge that sometimes love means standing firm, even when it breaks you. A week later, the battles found their way beyond the estate walls. It began with a phone call from the bank, polite but edged with suspicion. The branch manager's voice was calm, rehearsed, but I could hear the unease in every syllable. "Mrs. Callahan, there have been concerns raised regarding the legitimacy of your control over the Callahan estate. For security purposes, we require you to come in with documentation to verify ownership and authority over the accounts." I knew at once where the concerns had come from. Anonymous tips had become Aaron and Lydia's favorite weapon. This was simply another attempt to paint me as unfit, unstable, a woman too fragile to manage her own affairs. I called Harold and Marina immediately. "They want me at the bank," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands shook as I held the phone. "Good," Harold replied. "We'll meet them head on." The next morning, I dressed with purpose. I pinned the green brooch to my blouse, smoothed my jacket, and walked into the bank as though I carried not just my name, but Victor's beside me. Harold flanked me with his folder, Marina with her laptop. Together, we stepped into the manager's office, where two bankers waited, their expressions guarded. The manager, a man in his 50s with thinning hair, gestured toward the chairs. "Mrs. Callahan, thank you for coming. We've had inquiries about the estate. To ensure the security of such significant holdings, we must confirm your position." I folded my hands in my lap. "And you will," I said quietly. Harold placed the folder on the desk and opened it. Page after page slid across the polished wood. Victor's notarized will, medical certifications proving his sound mind, signatures of witnesses, copies of trust documents. "This is the complete record of Victor Callahan's estate plan," Harold explained. "Executed flawlessly, reviewed by independent counsel, every legal standard met." The younger banker adjusted her glasses, flipping through the pages with quick, practiced eyes. Her brow furrowed at first, but then softened. Each document closed the space for doubt. Marina leaned forward, her laptop screen glowing with spreadsheets and transaction histories. "Every account, every transfer, every audit is here. Transparent, traceable, irrefutable. If you've received claims of irregularities, they are false. The records speak for themselves." She tapped the screen, highlighting neat rows of numbers that told a story of stability, not chaos. The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. My heart thudded, but I kept my face calm, steady. I would not let them see the storm inside me. Finally, the manager leaned back, letting out a breath. He closed the folder gently, as though it carried more weight than paper. "I see no basis for the concerns raised. Everything is in order. More than that, Mrs. Callahan, your estate and the company are models of compliance. I apologize for the inconvenience." The younger banker nodded, her voice almost apologetic. "You'd be surprised how many families fight over inheritances. But this..." She tapped the folder softly. "This is airtight. You've honored your husband's planning well." Relief coursed through me, but it was not triumphant. It was quieter, steadier. Aaron and Lydia had tried to corner me with suspicion, but all they had managed to do was reinforce Victor's trust and my right to hold it. Harold gathered the documents with deliberate care, sliding them back into the folder. "I trust this resolves any future questions," he said firmly. "It does," the manager replied. He stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Callahan, you have our respect and our support." As I shook his hand, I felt the strength return to me, not because I had won, but because I had endured. When we stepped back out into the sunlight, Marina exhaled, her usual composure cracking just enough for me to see the relief beneath it. "They tried to paint you as a shadow, Iris, but you're the light in this story. Don't ever forget that." I touched the brooch at my collar, feeling its cool weight. "I won't," I said softly. We walked together across the parking lot, our steps in rhythm. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel hunted. I felt grounded. The estate was secure, the company intact, and the truth undeniable. Yet as we climbed into Harold's car, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. I imagined Aaron and Lydia watching from afar, their plans unraveling piece by piece. I knew this wouldn't be their last attempt, but for today, I had stood firm. And for today, that was enough. It started with whispers. I heard them first in the town market, when I went to buy fresh bread and fruit for the estate kitchen. Two women stood by the flower stall, their voices low but sharp enough to reach me. "Poor Iris Callahan," one murmured. "They say she's slipping. Can't manage the company anymore. Imagine 60 million in her hands and not a clue what to do with it." The other shook her head, her eyes darting in my direction. "I heard she forgets things, that she's unstable. Maybe that's why her son wants control. It's safer that way." I carried my basket past them, my face calm, but inside their words cut deep. Lydia's hand was all over this. I could hear her cadence in the poison, spreading the idea that I was fragile, unfit, a danger to my own legacy. It was clever. Lies often are. Back at the estate, the phone rang with hesitant voices. Old acquaintances calling not to check on me, but to test the waters. "Are you all right, Iris?" they would ask, their tones heavy with suggestion. Each call left me colder. Each question another chip at my dignity. That evening, I sat by the fire in the living room, the wooden box on the table beside me, Victor's journal and letters tucked safely inside. I thought of sealing myself off, letting the rumors fester without answer. But then the gates buzzed, and Tom appeared with 3 familiar faces behind him. Families from the old workshop community, people Victor had once helped when times were hard. They carried no malice, only warmth. A young mother stepped forward, her daughter clutching her hand. She held out an envelope, its edges worn from being handled too often. "Mrs. Callahan," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you. Years ago, when my husband lost his job, Victor made sure we had a place to stay. He set up that emergency fund. Without it, we would have lost everything. And now, we hear you've reopened it. You're helping families again." I took the envelope with trembling hands, sliding the letter out carefully. The handwriting was simple, heartfelt. Words of gratitude filled the page. Stories of lives touched not by fortune, but by compassion. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. Another man stepped forward, his cap in his hands. "Don't listen to what folks say. We know better. You've stood by us when others turned away. This estate isn't just marble and money. It's a beacon, and you're the one keeping it lit." The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and then looked up at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Thank you for helping my daddy." I felt the dam inside me break. The rumors had left me raw, but here was truth, undeniable, living truth, standing on my doorstep. These families carried the real story of Victor's legacy and of mine. Not wealth, not status, but people who had been given hope. I knelt to meet the little girl's gaze, smoothing her hair back gently. "No need to thank me, sweetheart," I whispered. "Your father earned his place. We just made sure he had a chance to show it." As they left, their words lingered in the halls like a balm. For every whisper Lydia spread, there were voices ready to rise in my defense. And those voices mattered more. Later that night, I sat at the oak table, the letter from the young mother resting beside my tea. I traced the words again and again until they blurred. The pain of Aaron's betrayal had not lessened, but for the first time I felt a counterweight, the quiet strength of community. The brooch at my collar caught the firelight, scattering tiny emerald sparks across the page. I realized then that no amount of rumor could steal the truth. Victor had built a foundation of loyalty and compassion, and I was carrying it forward. I whispered into the quiet room as though speaking to him. "They tried to make me small, Victor, but tonight I feel taller than I have in years." The estate walls no longer felt like a fortress built against betrayal. They felt like a gathering place, a sanctuary for the stories that mattered. And as long as I guarded them, no rumor could undo what we had built. The day of the memorial dawned clear, the sky painted in soft gold as if the world itself paused to honor Victor. It had been a year since his passing, and though time had dulled some of the sharpest edges of grief, the ache of his absence was still there, steady and quiet. I dressed carefully that morning, pinning the green brooch at my collar as I always did when I needed strength. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman older, wearier, but also steadier. "We'll do this together," I whispered to him. By mid-afternoon, the estate grounds filled with people, workers from the old factory, families who had benefited from the emergency fund, students supported by scholarships we had begun to offer in his name, all gathered beneath the oak trees Victor himself had planted decades ago. Tables were lined with photographs, sketches from his journals, and a display of the first chair he had ever designed. It was simple, sturdy, and beautiful, just like the man himself. I walked slowly through the crowd, stopping to embrace those who shared their stories. An elderly woman clasped my hands and said, "Victor gave my son his first job. He told him, 'Everyone deserves a chance to build something.' He believed in people." A young student, barely 18, showed me his scholarship letter with tears in his eyes. "Because of this, I can go to college," he said. Their words were like a chorus, lifting me as I climbed the small platform at the center of the garden. A hush fell over the crowd. I looked out at the sea of faces, faces filled with respect, gratitude, and love. Faces that reminded me Victor's legacy was not measured in numbers, but in lives changed. "My friends," I began, my voice steady though my throat tightened. "Today we gather not only to remember my husband, but to carry forward what he stood for. Victor believed in the dignity of work, in the value of honesty, and in the strength of community. He built Callahan Interiors with his hands, but he built this legacy with his heart." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the crowd. Some of you knew him as an employer, some as a mentor, some as a friend. I knew him as the love of my life, and though I miss him every day, I feel him here, through each of you, through every story, every life he touched. I lifted a folder from the podium and opened it. Today, in his honor, we launched the Callahan Foundation Scholarship, dedicated to helping children of workers and families in need pursue education. This is what Victor would have wanted, that his work continue to give others the chance to build their own futures. The crowd erupted into applause, warm and long, filling the air with an energy that felt almost holy. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I did not wipe them away. They were part of the moment, as real as the joy surrounding me. And then, as the clapping softened, I caught sight of a figure at the edge of the gathering. Far back, near the shadows of the old stone wall, stood Aaron. He didn't approach, didn't speak. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders slumped. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. My heart clenched. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of his choices etched into his face. He did not step forward, though. He only lingered there, watching, as though caught between pride and shame, longing and bitterness. When the applause rose again, he turned away, disappearing into the quiet edges of the property. I steadied myself, pressing a hand against the brooch. There was pain in seeing him there, pain in knowing he could not join us, but also a strange solace. He hadn't turned his back completely. He was still tethered, however faintly, to the legacy his father had left. As the ceremony drew to a close, the crowd joined hands in silence, heads bowed. I closed my eyes, picturing Victor beside me, his hand warm against mine, his voice low in my ear. "You kept the compass steady." When I opened my eyes again, the faces before me were no longer just guests. They were family, woven together by the work Victor had begun and I now carried forward. I realized then that I was not alone, and never would be again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the estate glowed with lantern light, I stood on the veranda, watching the last of the guests depart. My heart was heavy, but also full. This was not just a memorial. It was a beginning. The morning after the memorial, the estate was quiet again. The echoes of applause, the warmth of shared stories, The sight of Aaron lingering in the shadows. All of it stayed with me like an aftertaste, bittersweet and lingering. I sat in Victor's study with a cup of tea, sunlight spilling across the desk where his old journal and my wooden box still rested. For the first time in months, the air around me felt lighter, like the house itself had breathed a sigh of relief. It was then that my laptop chimed. I hesitated before opening it, wary of what might await me in the inbox. And there it was, an email from Aaron. The subject line read simply, "Proposal for collaboration." My hands stilled on the keyboard. Collaboration. It was a word carefully chosen, softer than demand, sharper than plea. I clicked it open, and his words filled the screen. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about Dad's legacy. I know we've had our differences, but I believe we can still build something together. I've attached a PDF outlining a project that Lydia and I are working on. With your resources and my vision, we could expand Callahan Interiors into a modern brand, something global. It would honor Dad, and it would secure our family's future. Please take a look. Let's not stay at odds." Aaron. I sat back in the chair, the words blurring for a moment as I read them again. For a brief instant, I wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the fragile thread of hope that he might finally understand, finally choose to stand beside me instead of against me. I opened the attachment. It was a polished presentation, slick with promises. Graphs, projections, flashy renderings of modern designs that looked nothing like Victor's work. Bold colors, sweeping lines, beautiful in their way, but hollow. Nowhere in those pages was the soul of Callahan Interiors. Nowhere was the integrity, the craftsmanship, the quiet dignity that had carried us through decades. It wasn't my husband's legacy he wanted to honor. It was his own ambition, dressed up in the language of family. I closed the file and stared at the screen. 1,000 memories pressed against me. Aaron as a boy, running through the workshop, Victor lifting him onto a stool to show him how to sand a piece of wood. "Gentle son," Victor had said. "The grain will tell you how it wants to be treated. Listen to it." Aaron had nodded back then, eager, attentive. But, somewhere along the way, he stopped listening. The cursor blinked on the empty reply window, waiting. My fingers hovered above the keys, but I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch, let the truth settle. I thought of Victor's letter, of his faith in me. I thought of the families who had stood at my door with thank you letters, of the students whose futures were tied to the scholarship we had launched. I thought of Aaron standing outside the memorial, too proud to join, too broken to leave entirely. Finally, I began to type. "Aaron, I read your email, and I reviewed your proposal. I see the work you've put into it, but I cannot accept. What you call collaboration feels more like surrender, and I will not surrender the heart of what your father built. Callahan Interiors is not a brand to be stripped of its soul for profit. It is a legacy of integrity, of dignity, of service to others. I cannot and will not merge that with something that does not carry those values. I wish you luck, truly, in whatever ventures you pursue, but I will not be part of them. Mom." I read the words aloud softly, testing them against the silence. They rang true, steady, and clear. My hand hovered over the trackpad for a long moment, then pressed send. The soft whoosh of the email leaving felt final, like closing a door gently but firmly. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. My chest ached, but it wasn't regret. It was the ache of choosing to stand, the ache of drawing a boundary and keeping it. For too long, I had let myself believe that love meant yielding. But Victor had trusted me not to yield, and today I had kept that trust. The sunlight caught the brooch on my collar, scattering green sparks across the desk. I reached out and rested my hand on Victor's journal. I did it, love, I whispered. I stood. The inbox stayed silent. No reply came from Aaron, not that day, not the next. But I didn't need one. My answer had been sent, not just to him, but to myself. Sometimes strength isn't found in shouting, in grand gestures, or even in victories that others can see. Sometimes it's in the quiet refusal, the soft but immovable no. And in that refusal, I found peace. The weeks after the memorial carried a new rhythm. The estate, once filled with echoes of conflict, now hummed with purpose. Each morning I woke with a steadier step, fastening the green brooch to my blouse, as though it were a reminder from Victor himself. Keep the compass steady. We launched the Callahan Foundation from the estate's library, transforming the long oak table into a planning desk. Marina sat at one end with her spreadsheets, numbers marching in neat rows that translated our fortune into scholarships, grants, and emergency funds. Harold worked beside her, reviewing legal documents, ensuring every clause would protect the foundation from the kind of challenges Aaron and Lydia might still attempt. Tom brought coffee for everyone, his hands rough from the workshop but gentle as he placed a steaming mug before me. And Eleanor, though retired, joined as an honorary board member, her presence lending credibility that no money could buy. In our first official meeting, Marina clicked through a presentation on her laptop, the screen reflecting in her glasses. We can begin with a scholarship program for the children of factory workers. 5 students this year, maybe 10 the next. The trust fund Victor left is large enough to sustain it for decades. I nodded, picturing the young man who had shown me his acceptance letter at the memorial. Yes, I said, that's exactly what he would have wanted. Harold leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. We'll also need to set aside funds for emergencies. You remember the housing crisis years ago, when Victor quietly paid rent for 6 families? This foundation should carry that spirit forward. Tom grinned, his eyes softening. He never bragged about it either. Just said, "A man's work is measured in the people who can sleep easier at night." I felt a lump rise in my throat. For a moment, the room blurred, filled with Victor's voice and laughter, though he was gone. I placed my hand on the wooden box at my side, where his letters rested. Then that's what we'll do. We'll make sure people can sleep easier at night. The first scholarship ceremony was held in the estate's garden. Folding chairs lined the lawn. Children in pressed shirts and dresses sat nervously beside proud parents. I stood at the front with Marina, handing out envelopes embossed with the Callahan seal. Each envelope carried more than a financial promise. It carried hope. When I handed a scholarship to a shy young woman with bright eyes, she whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. I'll make you proud." "You already have," I replied softly. The crowd applauded as each student received their award. Cameras clicked, but what stayed with me were not the flashes of light or the polite claps. It was the tears of parents, the laughter of children, the way gratitude seemed to ripple through the air like a hymn. After the ceremony, families gathered around me, pressing letters of thanks into my hands. Some hugged me tightly, some simply bowed their heads with quiet dignity. Their words filled the hollow space that grief and betrayal had carved inside me. "This," Eleanor said quietly, standing beside me as the crowd dispersed, "is how you win, not in courtrooms or confrontations, but here, by giving life where others would only take." I touched the brooch, feeling its weight steady me. "It isn't about winning anymore," I said. "It's about carrying forward what Victor started, and knowing that it's bigger than me." In the weeks that followed, the foundation grew. Letters poured in, requests, thank yous, stories of hardship and resilience. Some nights I sat by the fire reading them, tears streaming freely, the wooden box beside me as if Victor himself were reading too. The estate, once a battleground, became a beacon. Its halls echoed not with arguments, but with meetings, plans, and laughter from families who came to visit. The marble floors felt less like monuments to wealth and more like pathways to something enduring. I realized then that the $60 million Victor had entrusted to me was never meant to sit as cold figures on a balance sheet. It was meant to flow outward, to become shelter, opportunity, hope. And through the foundation, it did. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the valley in shades of amber, I stood on the veranda with Tom. He leaned on the railing, gazing at the families leaving after another board meeting. "You've turned this place around, Mrs. Callahan. It doesn't feel like a house anymore. It feels alive again." I smiled, my heart full. "That's because it is. It always was. It just needed to be opened again." The wind stirred the leaves in the garden below, carrying with it voices, laughter, gratitude. And for the first time in years, I felt Victor not as an absence, but as a presence woven into every brick, every tree, every life touched by his work and mine. The foundation was more than a promise. It was proof that legacies don't end. They expand. The house was quiet again, not with the silence of emptiness, but with the kind of stillness that comes after music, the echo of something beautiful that lingers long after the last note. Late afternoon light poured through the tall windows of the sitting room, spilling across the table where a teapot sat, steam curling in soft ribbons. The scent of chamomile filled the air, warm and calming. I sat by the window with the wooden box beside me, the brooch pinned at my collar, and Victor's letter resting under my hand. Outside, the valley stretched wide and golden, the fields glowing as though the world itself had chosen peace. I lifted the porcelain cup, its surface smooth against my fingers, and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through me, quieting the restless parts of my heart. The green stone of the brooch caught the last rays of sunlight, scattering emerald sparks across the table. I let my eyes follow them, remembering the night I had stood in this very house after being cast out of Aaron's apartment, drenched and shaken, clutching nothing but this brooch and a box of memories. I had been lost then, unsure of how to stand. Now, the same house held me steady, filled not with ghosts, but with purpose. I thought of Aaron, of the shadows where he lingered during the memorial. My heart ached still, a dull ache that no foundation or victory could erase. He was my son, and nothing could change that. But I had also learned that love did not mean surrender, and forgiveness did not mean erasure. Some distances cannot be closed, not yet, maybe not ever. And still, I loved him. I set the cup down gently and opened the wooden box. Inside, Victor's handwriting stared back at me, his words etched in ink as though time could never touch them. "You are the compass. Keep it steady." I traced the letters with my finger, the ink long dried but alive in meaning. For a long while I simply sat there, holding the weight of his words, the weight of everything we had built and everything I had survived. I had been betrayed, cast aside, whispered about, and tested. And yet, I was still here, still standing, still holding the compass steady. The valley below shimmered in the glow of dusk, and I realized this was what quiet justice looked like. Not in grand pronouncements or loud triumphs, but in a woman sitting at her own window, sipping tea, carrying forward a legacy no one could take from her. I leaned back, letting the chair cradle me, and spoke softly into the stillness. "Victor, I kept my promise, and I found my own way too. The brooch glowed in the fading light, as if answering me, as if reminding me that strength is not loud, but it lasts. The world outside the window grew softer as the sun dipped lower, painting everything in hues of amber and rose. I lifted the teacup once more, breathing in the chamomile, letting its calm settle deep inside me. This was the ending, yes, but also the beginning. A life not defined by loss or betrayal, but by resilience, by dignity, by the choice to keep walking forward. And to those who might listen, I would say this. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, know that dignity will carry you farther. It will steady you when the world shakes. It will keep you whole when others try to break you. I sipped the last of my tea, setting the cup down gently on its saucer. The window framed the valley bathed in the soft glow of evening, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not just peace, but freedom. The story was not one of riches won or lost. It was a story of holding on, of refusing to let go of self-worth, of knowing when to say no and when to stand. It was a story of love that endures even through fracture, of legacies that live not in walls or wealth, but in the quiet choices we make to honor them. As the light faded and the room dimmed, I closed the wooden box, placed it gently on the shelf beside Victor's journals, and rose. Tomorrow would bring more work for the foundation, more families to help, more letters to answer. But tonight, there was only chamomile tea, a brooch glinting in the last light, and the knowledge that I had not only survived, I had prevailed. And in that stillness, I smiled.